Today's episode, I'm chatting with Elwin Robinson. He created a cool company that does DNA test kits. And I'm going to unbox this right now and start my DNA test. And the reason why this is important is because a lot of us end up with some funky ass issues post-service. We don't quite know where they're from. Elwin has a bunch of genetic tests that can determine whether or not you're more susceptible to heavy metal poisoning like he was. And we discuss lead poisoning and the benefits of getting your genetic testing done for guys like myself who seems to excrete a lot of potassium out of the blue but has really high cortisol levels. We get into it on the show, so stay tuned. You're also going to get a discount for anybody that wants to get some genetic testing done. You can find a link in the description. So enjoy the episode. Make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get after it. If you're fed up with the Americans telling us what to do here in Canada and you want to support a Canadian-owned business, then go buy my new book called Harden the Fuck Up. This book is an Amazon bestseller for a reason. Let me read a honest review from one of our hard-charging generals, Major General Dennis Thompson. With firsthand experience from Afghanistan, Dave offers a powerful science-backed guide to becoming truly hard, happy, aggressive, ready, and disciplined. He provides a roadmap for Canadian veterans to achieve lifelong resilience, breaking down essential habits like finding inner happiness, embracing controlled aggression, maintaining readiness, and mastering discipline in fitness, sleep, and nutrition. With expert insights and practical no-fail missions, this book equips veterans with the tools they need to thrive in both body and mind for the long term. So do what you got to do. Become a better version of yourself. Support a Canadian-owned business and go get yourself a copy of Harden the Fuck Up, available on Amazon in paperback, audio format, and ebook.
Hey folks, today I'm sitting down with Elwin Robinson. He's the founder of Genetics Insights, an easy-to-use direct-to-consumer platform that allows people to uphold their DNA from ancestry services. And I thought this was such a novel concept because tapping into our ability to know what our genes are doing is something that makes me super excited because I'm a total nerd when it comes to science with my background in biochem. That was just like what I like to do. But then B, practical solutions for the community. And going down that rabbit hole is going to be really interesting. So Elwin, welcome to the podcast, man. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I think it's the best podcast title I've ever been on. I love it. Hard to kill. That's great.
Right on. Well, that's what we're going to get into, man. How do we make ourselves harder to kill with what you've developed? So let's get into that. Like, what exactly are you doing with the genetic insights?
Yeah, great question. So if someone's done an ancestry service like 23andMe, Ancestry.com, whatever, it is super, super simple. You can sign up for our service. You get your raw data from those companies. Sometimes it's just a matter of clicking a couple of buttons. Sometimes you've got to email them. You upload it to our system, and within a few hours, you get an immense amount of insight as to all kinds of things. We're considering renaming the company to Advanced Genetic Insights. Advanced Genetic Health Insights, just to explain to people a bit more, because we are health focused, health and well-being, let's just say. So we're not focused so much on ancestry, right? We're not telling you, you're 86% this or whatever. We're really focused on your health and well-being. And so, if you sign up, you get access to over 500, probably by the time this comes out, well over that, even different reports on all kinds of different topics, like, blood sugar, weight loss, digestive issues, emotional well-being, addictive tendencies, allergies and intolerances, whether you have a problem with different toxins, whether you need more than the average person of certain nutrients, whether you have like innate hormonal imbalances. And I mean, I could go on and on. Like there's a huge amount of information in there. And all of it is super helpful from my point of view as someone who's been in the health industry kind of all my life because my parents were both in it. But, as a full-time job since 2010, so the last 14 years. But it's only the last 3 years that I realized how incredibly important genetics was and how it was this missing piece. And I'm embarrassed to say it, but I was like a lot of other health educators, researchers, whatever you want to call it out there, and that I was giving out quite generic advice to people about things. And what I've really realized recently is there is almost no health advice that is universally applicable to all people. And I know it's maybe controversial, but like literally, like exercise is good for you. Well, not if you've got chronic fatigue, not if you've got an injury that would exacerbate it, right? Okay, well, fresh air is good for you. Not if you've got allergies to the pollen in the air. Well, sunlight is good for you. Well, not if you have sun sensitivity. This food is good for you. Steak is good for you. Vegetables are good for you. Not if you have these different issues. So there's always something. So the only thing I've ever been able to find that is probably universally good for everyone would be to purify or filter their air or purify or filter their water. That's something that is probably good for everyone. But beyond that, everything is context dependent. And so I'm a big fan of testing in general these days, David, but I'm especially a big fan of starting with genetic testing, which is why I created my company around it, because you can get such an incredibly large amount of helpful and accurate information, and also for a very low cost. So as someone who does consultations with people frequently myself, and often people come with a budget, it's especially if they come with a very, what would you say, broad issue, I'm tired all the time, or I want to lose weight or something, I've tried diets and it hasn't worked. There are so many things that could be the problem, right? And so to narrow down what to focus on, is it a hormonal thing? Is it nutritional deficiency? Is it some kind of toxin? Is it some kind of chronic infection? Is it some kind of emotional, psychological issue? And on and on and on. There's so many different things, avenues that you can go down. And, part of my life's work is to codify that. I have a book coming up soon called The Rejuvenate Blueprint, resolving the 7 root causes of chronic disease, because I think, that's really the issue these days, right? I think 100%. A few thousand years ago, 1 in 3 people were dying of a violent death, throughout some of our history, much more recently, that's been that high, right? And up until about 100 years ago, the majority of people were dying of infectious diseases, so acute illnesses. But these days, you're almost definitely not going to be killed by someone trying to kill you. To go back to, as you said, your podcast title, Hard to Kill. It's almost certainly not going to be by violence, even if you're, in the armed services. It's probably not going to be by any kind of acute infection, at least, and if it is, there's probably some chronic disease behind why you're susceptible to that. It's almost definitely the thing that's going to kill you is chronic disease, either indirectly or directly. And so looking at those root causes is super, super important. I'm very happy that in, the US, which really sets the tone, there's more talk about that these days, what actually are the causes of chronic disease, and are we all being poisoned, right? Is our food full of poison? Is our air full of poison? Is our water full of poison? And so poisoning is definitely one factor, but as I said, I think there are 7. And the first one that I look at is the genetics, because different people have different susceptibilities. And I can give you examples if you like.
Well, I mean, you touched on a lot of really important things there. One of them being, chronic disease. And the last figure I saw, and I put it in my new book that's going to be coming out, is that 2/3 of all deaths are attributable to chronic disease now. 2/3, so 66%, right? That's metabolic disease, that's obesity. You throw it all in, and so you're right. That is the leading cause of death, hands down.
I think that's
it's
worldwide.
Even higher. Yeah, likely. Yeah.
In Canada, US, UK, these kind of countries, I believe, it's really over 90%. I mean, some of it they put down to accidental death, poisoning, but what's actually in there often is it's what they call iatrogenic death. So basically doctor kills you while they're trying to treat you. And the thing they're usually trying to treat you for is chronic disease and drug overdoses and stuff like that. But I personally would say that, a drug addiction is a chronic disease. And so therefore a drug overdose is a side effect of a chronic disease.
You're trying to, take care of the symptoms by hitting yourself with whatever it is that you're lacking, and whether it's crack or meth, it's a symptom of a larger problem. I totally agree, and you find the things that will help calm your central nervous system, and sometimes it's alcohol, sometimes it's hard drugs. I totally agree with you on that. And in terms of the shift towards chronic disease and being aware of chronic disease, we're seeing it in the election cycle now in the US, right? For the first time in my lifetime, I'm 43 years old, I've never seen a politician talk about health as being a major part of a political plank. And that's what Robert F. Kennedy is talking about, make America healthy again. And it's holy crap, wait, you're going to be part of potentially the next administration talking about health as the main concern that we need to be worried about.
Yeah.
And people that don't quite get what he's talking about think that that's crazy, but that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fundamental issues. You can't ascend to the next level of, let's say, you want to call it consciousness, or you want to get to the next level of your business, or you want to get to the next level of being a better human being. Fundamentally, if you're very unhealthy, if you're riddled with chronic disease issues, how are you going to move up? How are we going to, as a society, get better? And I see it now in the kids, right? They're obese, they're not active, and we're just setting ourselves up for complete and utter collapse. So, like, I'm curious to know, in terms of what you're talking about here, like, what was your inspiration to be so passionate about what you're talking about here and setting up the companies?
Well, as I said, both my parents are into health, but also both my parents were very unhealthy. So, I saw that. My dad had chronic fatigue, ME. My mother had cancer several times, and she died of it when I was, pretty young. I was 25. I wasn't that young, but my sister was quite young, and she was quite young still. And like I saw with her always, she kind of went through phases. She would get a diagnosis and she would clean up her act and clean up her diet and do these detox protocols. And she would even clean up her mindset. She would like be all positive thinking and like listening to hypnosis tapes about, focusing on the positive and healing and all that kind of stuff. And then, sometimes if it was just a tumor, that would often work. If it was full on cancer, sometimes, there'd be a surgical intervention or whatever. I don't think she ever did chemo. And basically I saw, repeatedly that would work for her. And then conversely, as soon as she got better, as soon as she had the all clear diagnosis, she'd go back to eating junk food, back to not looking after herself, back to having like a very negative mindset, all this kind of stuff, and drop all the good stuff she'd been doing. And then sooner or later, the illness came back again. And so I think I really saw that. And so I think a lot of people, they struggle to really believe that all these lifestyle things could have such a large impact. First of all, because of all the propaganda we're told that it's irrelevant, but also just because they haven't seen it. Right. So that's why, I mention it to say I actually saw it over and over again, the difference that it made. But, I was a rebellious person. I was not into health and I got into drugs and, unhealthy lifestyle and pretty much every dimension until my late 20s. And then I kind of turned it around. I did all the usual stuff to be healthy, all the boring stuff that, everyone already talks about. And it kind of worked. And I would say between late 20s and 40, I got healthier and healthier, and I became a business. Like I said, I was selling herbs, and I even had courses, and I do speaking engagements throughout the world and all this kind of stuff. And then a few years ago, suddenly I developed this pain condition in my lower right rib cage area, and it was investigated by medical doctors first. I always start with medical if there's a problem, and I advise other people to do the same. Some people are resistant, but I think if nothing else, it's useful to get a diagnosis, right? And so, but they couldn't find anything. I did, all kinds of alternative practitioners like functional medicine, naturopath, nutritionist, all that kind of stuff. I learned a bunch of interesting stuff, but they weren't able to help. So then I was like, well, it gets worse when I eat and stuff, but maybe it's like a structural thing, right? Because it's like around the rib cage. Maybe it's like, like the ribs are out of place and they're pressing on the digestive system, something like that. So then I saw like a physiotherapist, osteopath, chiropractor, craniosacral therapist, and all kinds of other more obscure things most people probably haven't heard of. And all of that was probably beneficial, but again, none of that solved the issue. And this was a bad pain issue. Some of your audience, I'm sure, can relate because, over 50% of people over the age of 40 are in pain. So this is not, any big deal, I realize. But this was a specific type of pain that, like normal painkillers, NSAIDs was completely ineffective for. I'm not even saying maybe because it was so bad, but just because it was the type of pain. It was completely irrelevant. Like it wasn't really inflammatory pain. So all of those things just did not work. But usually what they do, if you have that kind of pain and nothing works, they give you an opiate, right? Which is dangerous, but it is what they do to give you some relief. But they tried that and it made the pain far worse. Actually, it was a type of pain that it was impossible to escape. And basically every time that I kind of tried to exert myself, it's especially sitting down was a problem. I was okay walking and I was definitely okay lying down, but sitting down was always painful and eating always made it worse. And so I became like paranoid about eating and I lost more and more weight. And I was always a bit underweight. I'm 6'3". Now I'm like 190 pounds. For most of my life, I was 160, but I got down to like 130. I got, maybe even a bit lower. I was really emaciated. And it was not through not wanting to eat or, no anorexia or anything. It was just because every time I ate, I was in pain. And so it was, like more pain. So it was an issue. And, I started to feel cold all the time. I started to have this intense anxiety all the time. I became hypersensitive to everything, pretty much every type of food disagreed with me, but also, herbs, supplements, medications, and then even like, strong smells, like everything. I was just basically useless, like hypersensitive to everything in this complete state. And so, so this is what led me to try all these different practitioners. And eventually, because nothing else worked, I was like, well, maybe, and these doctors looked at me like I was crazy. I was in the emergency room a few times. They're like, there's nothing wrong with you. And so I'm like, well, maybe it is all in my head. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's some kind of emotional issue. I did have a very traumatic childhood. Took it hard to kill. I mean, my dad almost killed me when I was 1, like violently. And then my mother almost killed me when I was 3, kind of possibly accidentally. It's not proven either way, but basically she left some pure bleach in reach and I drank it and almost died. Had to have the stomach pumped, which also is not good for your health, right? Like killed the whole microbiome and all that. Way worse than antibiotics, pure bleach.
Yeah, kidding.
So, and throughout my childhood, violence from my father and bullying because we kept moving from different locations, so I never settled anywhere. All this kind of stuff. To say that my nervous system was on like hypervigilant, high alert, or whatever. Definitely. So it was not implausible that it might be an emotional, whatever, psychological root to this. So I did all that stuff. I went to see like a normal therapist. I tried all kinds of more alternative-y stuff before because of my deep suspicion of mainstream, but none of that had helped. So I kind of saw a normal therapist and did kind of all kinds of normal trauma practices and EMDR and all that kind of stuff. And none of that actually helped. Again, it was all good for me and it was all good stuff to learn about and do, but it didn't really help for the pain. And so, by this time I've been going on for several years. Luckily, I'd already built that business I mentioned. So I couldn't work very much, but luckily it was able to fund me, and I wasn't also destitute. That would have. So I came across this service, which was genetics, and it said if you've ever done an ancestry thing before, you can upload your data, and within a few hours, we'll give you all this information. So background: I've already paid for all these different practitioners. I've already done loads of self-testing as well, and it's kind of been little things and think, oh, maybe that's it, but it isn't. A lot of that kind of stuff. And so I was like, well, I can do this right here from home. It looks pretty cheap. It says it gives you loads of information and I don't even have to go anywhere or do anything. Like, I don't have to go and get my blood drawn or all this kind of stuff that I normally have to do. I was like, sign me up, right? In comparison to what I had already been doing, it seemed very easy. And I think I did it in the middle of the night. I also couldn't sleep. That was another issue. And, I started to get the results within a couple of hours, and I was just blown away at how incredibly accurate it was. And I'd love to say that it just immediately told me what was going on in me and I immediately fixed it. But that would be a lie. But it did give me clues as to what it was. And it was actually several factors. And when I verified that those were true with then doing other testing, like blood testing, and then I addressed those, then it actually did help me diagnose and resolve the problem. So it was an essential part of it. And so I was really impressed, and I thought maybe it's a fluke that's so accurate and helpful for me, because it tells you all kinds of stuff. It's not just health stuff. It's also like even personality traits, like stuff like that you wouldn't think.
Really?
Like, yeah. Like, the big 5, like extroversion, introversion, agreeable, disagreeable, all that. It tells you those. And obviously it's not 100% because environment and upbringing have a part, but it's like 40%, it has a significant impact on the genes. And I'm surprised at how accurate it is now. I've gone through it with a lot of people. So anyway, then I tried it with my wife, that's the first person, then a few of my business partners, friends, and then all the employees that are willing to do it, family members that are willing to do it. So I've done it with maybe a couple of dozen people. And I was like, wow, this is consistent. And it helps, I won't go, maybe we have time to do the stories, but actually sometimes the answers were super easy, unlike in my case. Like literally this person was struggling with this. Like I'll say one because it's a business partner who's publicly talked about it in his podcast. He was really struggling. He couldn't get out of bed in the morning. He thought he was depressed. He thought he maybe had low testosterone. It's like, to me, that sounds like thyroid, but and he didn't want to go to a doctor. He's one of those type of people. And he didn't have time.
That's very good. That's a very common trait with a lot of us folks in the community.
Especially men. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Men do not want to go to a doctor. And he was working like 80-hour weeks, and he said he didn't have time. He was kind of right. So I said, all right. And he wanted to help me with this genetics business, which is what we were just considering at the time. Should we do our own? So I said, if you're going to work with me on this, you have to try it for yourself. So, all right. So he does it. He sends off his saliva, gets his results back. And I look in his reports, and one of the top, because you can sort it by risk, like what you have the most chance of having a problem with. And one of the highest ones there was hypothyroidism, which means thyroid function being too low. I looked at the report, and it says you are the 99th risk percentile. So meaning 100 people in a room, you're the most likely to have thyroid problems. Again, not a guarantee, because obviously there's still environmental things that make that happen. But one of the environmental things that makes that happen if you're genetically susceptible is stress, which he had a bucket load of. So it seemed like a reasonable assumption. So then he actually does go to a doctor and do tests. I guided him on what kind I would recommend, which is not the normal type, because the normal type are kind of clueless. You have to go to someone who's interested in optimizing hormones, not only fixing you once you're extremely broken. But in his case, actually, even if he'd gone to a normal one, they would have diagnosed him as having it, because it turned out he had not only hypothyroidism, but Hashimoto's. And Hashimoto's is where your own immune system is attacking and slowly destroying your thyroid. So even if he had have gone to a normal doctor, in this case, they would have still acknowledged he had a problem and treated him, even though usually they ignore if you have thyroid issues, unless they're really severe. So yeah, and of course, once he started treating that, he could get out of bed and all the rest. And it turned out, I looked into it later, 100% of people with severe depression have low levels of T3, which is thyroid hormone. And over 80% of people with moderate depression have low levels of T3. And T3 is actually more effective at treating depression than SSRIs, according to many different studies. It's interesting, he experienced that as depression, because it's like, I have no desire to even get out of bed in the morning. But in his case, I'm not saying it's always the case, but in his case, and I think a lot of the time, it was not depression in the sense of anything psychological that a therapist can talk you out of. It was literally lacking the mitochondrial energy to function.
Precisely. Yeah. And the fact that he was able to go and do that much, you're operating on zero fuel in your gas tank, because you're metabolically not firing on all cylinders. Like you said, the mitochondria are just starving for energy, and they're just running on fumes. So he must have felt awful. I can only imagine how bad he felt, because this is an important topic. Now you're talking about depression, and this is something that I've been chatting with the folks from Grunt Style. They're a large American apparel company. They got a foundation. They're doing a lot of good stuff. And one of the things is they started a new campaign called Prescribing Suicides, because with over 22 veteran suicides a day in the United States, it's a bad issue that needs addressing. And the current model is not working, because the majority of us, as soon as you show signs of quote unquote mental illness, immediately it's an SSRI. And there's no discussion of side effects. There's no discussion of long-term plan. It's just, take these and you won't blow your brains out. But ultimately, it's not working. And part of my philosophy is that you can't treat the mind without the body. And everyone, like you said at the start of the interview, everyone is basically an N of one experiment. We have a ton of different factors that go into who we are, our environment, and now our genes. And the talk of genes is never brought up in this conversation. And the fact that things like your thyroid have a massive impact on your mental health, that's not a conversation we've had. And I'm talking about testosterone right now, and toxic exposure is kind of like a big flashing red light, because a lot of us were I guess you could say our endocrine systems were smashed because of the high levels of lead, PFOAs, PCBs. All these things are endocrine disrupting chemicals, and we just suck them back for sometimes years. And then you have guys that don't understand why they feel so terrible, but they have a free testosterone of 100 nanograms per deciliter. It's like, well, that's one reason why you feel like shit. And then, now the next conversation is maybe get your genes tested. Maybe your thyroid is crushed. These are all important conversations. So from your experience, right? First of all, in your case, what the protocol consist of for you specifically? Did you have to go, was it certain minerals? Was it hormone replacement? What path do you have to go down?
Fellas, bring it in. Nice and tight. Bring it in. Nice and tight. We need to talk about it. All right. Seriously. We need to talk about something that Most of us don't want to talk about it. That's why I put on my nice blue dress shirt to bring a bit of seriousness to an often hilarious topic. But your sexual health is no joke. Seriously though, sexual health needs a lot more attention than it's been given. Let me go over a few things here. Research has shown that regular sex, what's 1 to 2 times per week, can reduce the risk of cardiovascular mortality by 50%. Bring that one to your wife right now. Lower the risk of prostate cancer by 33% and reinvigorate your mind and body. The problem is 40% of men in their 40s, 50% of men in their 50s, and 60% of men in their 60s experience some form of erectile dysfunction. This is even worse in the veteran community. On top of all this, erectile dysfunction is correlated with a future cardiovascular event and is an early warning sign of a future issue. This is why Dr. Elliot, board certified urologist and friend of the podcast, has created this one of a kind, first in its category, revolutionary device called the Firm Tech Ring. This high-speed tech for your dick will give you real-time data and allow you to see how many nocturnal erections you get every night, which can be a great bit of data that you can bring to your doctor for a future conversation. Not only that, this data could literally save your life. You know, I'm all about improving the health and lives of the veteran community. And that's why I've paired up with Dr. Elliot Justin to provide you with a 10% discount if you head to the link that's here in the description to get yourself your first Firm Tech Ring if you use the code DMorrow at checkout. So head to the link in the description and start tracking so that you can start banging. All right, brother. So go do what you got to do and be one of the first to bring a whole new meaning to being hard to kill.
It's so funny you mentioned one, and yeah, you know, it's one of the biggest issues to me is not relatable to most people, but it's probably more likely to be more relatable to your audience. So I saw I had a genetic tendency for that my body could not detoxify lead very well, the heavy metal. And
okay, all right, okay.
Now, no functional medicine or anyone else had thought about that because I'd already tested hair leads, hair minerals, totally fine. I'd already tested urinary heavy metals and nothing had come up. So no normal practitioner would go, well, let's also spend what is significantly more money to test your blood for heavy metals. No one does that, basically. But because I had this in my genetics, I did like a very broad spectrum test called a NutriVal, which kind of tests your nutrient levels, your antioxidant status, a bunch of different things, and it includes testing your blood for the 4 most common heavy metals. And the lead came back so high, they had to retest it.
No.
So yeah, so the reference range, and reference range isn't even what's optimal, it's only what's normal. So the reference range is like 0 to 3 micrograms per deciliter. As you said, you're a biochemist. And the level at which it's considered harmful in children is anything over 5, because that can lead to then growth defects, lower IQ, severe behavioral issues, all the rest of it. And the level which is considered like hospitalizable for an adult, depending on the country, is like 45 or up. And mine was 27. So it's closer to hospitalized. Yeah.
That's like Roman emperor levels.
Well, as I say, it's not super uncommon for men who spend a lot of time on a gun range or shooting bullets, right? So that's why I mention it in the context of veterans, because that is a significant lead exposure. And funnily enough, if you look up the symptoms for lead toxicity, I had all of them, and one of them is unexplained abdominal pain, which is of course what I had. So then I go to my normal medical doctor over here, you know, the NHS. They're kind of not great for any non-acute issues, in my opinion. And I said, I got this test, could this explain all my symptoms? And, you know, all of it. Also, the emotional disturbance, the severe anxiety, the fact I'd never been violent, but I'd been a very angry person pretty much, you know, my whole teenage and adult life. And, you know, road ragey kind of thing, you know, never got too bad, but it was always like, you know, it would have been better if I was a bit more calm and, you know, patient person. And he said, yeah, it could be the problem. And he goes, we don't trust any of tests other than our own. I said, fine, you test it. So they did. They retested it. Yeah, they agreed. It was extremely high. With lead, because it's so hard to detoxify, they look for exposure. So I said, well, my wife has been eating roughly the same food, drinking roughly the same water, taking roughly the same supplements, eating off the same, crockery, all that kind of stuff. Test her. And they did, and her was 1. And we'd been together at the time for 10 years. So then I read the World Health Organization report on it. So as mainstream as you get, right? And they said that it turns out that in the average adult, 75% of the lead in their blood comes from their bones. So what happens is one of the big and I'll explain what all that means. One of the big problems with lead is that your body mistakes it for calcium. Now, this can cause severe problems, like I said, especially in growing children, like, autism and low IQ and failure to grow and behavioral issues, especially classic things like oppositional defiance disorder, like where they're really basically angry all the time and all that kind of stuff. And but one of the problems is your body mistakes it for calcium. And so calcium is essential for every cell, again, as you know, David, these processes. And so the lead goes in there and it basically doesn't do the function that it's supposed to, that calcium would. So anyway, one place that your body accumulates calcium is in your bones. So if you have a lot of lead, it accumulates the lead in your bones. And then what happens is the half-life of it is 20 years. So basically you could be in a situation like I was where you haven't had any lead exposure in maybe 10 or 20 years, but you have it in your bones and it just keeps leaching into your bloodstream. And the crazy annoying thing, and this is exactly what my experience was, every time you try and do something healthy, so let's say you start going to the gym and doing an intense exercise regime, or you go to the sauna to get a sweat on or anything like that, or maybe you try doing like breathing exercise like Wim Hof method. Anytime you do something like that, it actually increases a gene called NRF2 and some others as well. And it increases the turnover of the toxins coming out of the cell. And so basically then it floods your blood with more leads as well as other toxins. So basically,
it's a perfect example of like a positive feedback loop. You do more, you get more lead, then you're going to have to do more because you feel like shit. So you're just constantly trying to like outrun the lead, which if I understand correctly, it's not going to happen, right? Because as soon as you start doing a little more, you're like,
yeah, exactly. No wonder I was obsessed with health and I kept doing stuff. And as you say, sometimes I'd feel better and sometimes I'd feel worse. And so I was constantly chasing it. And so I say that because, there may be people listening who, your audience who have had a lot of lead exposure, maybe a long time ago, right? If it's been a long time since they served, but it may still be in their system. And it may explain why sometimes they feel totally fine, but then maybe sometimes, and it may even be not when they've done something bad, so not when they've gone on a drinking bender or whatever, but maybe when they try and do a workout regime or, as I said, any of those kind of positive, or maybe they try and clean up their diet, they might actually feel worse. And it might be because then the body is releasing that lead from storage in the skeleton.
Fascinating. This is a fascinating conversation. I never thought about this, and this connection with lead and being and residing in the bone makes a lot of sense because it basically it penetrates all tissues. From what I remember from being in school, like lead that's why it's so dangerous, right? Like it's a great metal to use in plumbing. It's malleable, it's durable, like it's really good, except when you consume it and you put it in gasoline and you breathe it in, it's kind of toxic. And now you've got you understand, okay, it's lead, that's the issue. So in order to get rid of it, are you doing EDTA, IVs? Like what is that? What is the protocol now to get it out of your system?
Yeah, it was one of the issues. There were other things, but I won't go into it. I don't want to spend all the time talking about my, specific issues. But to answer your question, anything like EDTA, chelation therapy, DMSA as well is a good oral treatment. But the problem is it will make you, it can and usually does make you feel a lot worse because it's actually pulling more out of storage. And so it's something, unfortunately, you have to be very, very careful with. So my focus was more on doing everything I could to reduce the oxidative damage that it does, improving mitochondrial function, speeding up the metabolism carefully so that it increased that turnover, but in a way, because if you're just pulling out of storage, but your metabolism is still damaged, then once it's out of storage, your metabolism is not very capable of actually dealing with it, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, very much so. It's like the volume of the trucks leaving your factory, you can't handle a volume. So at that final destination, you can't handle a volume of product or whatever you have. So then it just sits around.
Yes.
Now what? Further ahead. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, the issue with detoxification, most people focus on either remove the toxin, like the obvious detoxing, right? Like quitting drinking or heroin or something like that. Or they focus on like, maybe I'm going to do a fast, or I'm going to do juice fast, or, maybe a intensive exercise thing or something like that. But a lot of the time people feel worse when they do that. And that's because it's kind of doing it the wrong way round from my point of view. Certainly from the point of view of if you want to minimize your own suffering. The best thing to do, first of all, is to support the exit pathways that toxins take out of your body. And so there's four main ones. So there's the lungs, but lead doesn't really go out through there, but some toxins do. There's the skin, there is the kidneys and bladder, and then there is the liver, and then intestines. And so for heavy metals, lead especially, it's primarily going out in normal course through the kidneys and through the liver, and then after that via the bladder and via the intestine. The problem is it causes a lot of strain on those elimination organs, and it does a lot of damage on the way out as well. And so the pain that I was actually having, it turned out I had something called sphincter of Oddi dysfunction, but basically this valve between the gallbladder and the duodenum was going into spasm and getting blocked. And then the gallbladder would start blowing up and then it would get irritated and inflamed, and the gallbladder would start blowing up like a balloon. And that's like the pain, and why it was so, sharp and particular, and why, most painkillers didn't work. And so there's something, I have my theories about this, but it's not, confirmed in any mainstream medicine. But there's a reason why with that kind of pain, the opiates don't work, which is related to, specific hormonal balances and stuff like that. But anyway, the key thing for me is I had cholestasis. So what cholestasis means is where the bile, so I know you know this, David, but I'm saying it more for your audience, right? The bile, if people know what it is at all, they often think of it as a thing that helps them digest fat, which is true. But the bile is actually also, so the liver is the main poison processing center in the body. I think most people know that in relation to alcohol and stuff like that. But the thing is, the problem with the liver is it doesn't have an exit hole, right? So your liver is like halfway up your rib cage on the right. There's no like direct, right, now I processed it, now out you go. It's going to take that poison that it's processed and prepared to remove as much as possible. And the way out that it goes is it puts it into the bile. So the same stuff that you use to digest fats is also the stuff that your body uses to transport these poisons out once it's processed them. And so from the liver, it goes into the gallbladder. From the gallbladder, it goes into let's say just the intestines, which is a very long snaking route. And then if everything's working properly, about 95 to 98% of that bile gets reabsorbed along with the toxins. So this is the problem. This is why it can be very difficult once you've built up a lot of toxins to get rid of it. But that's one problem. I had a different problem. I had an even worse problem, which is very common and underdiagnosed because most people don't have the spasm issue that I have, so they don't realize, which is called cholestasis. And so what cholestasis is where that bile becomes too thick and it becomes like sludge. They call it sludge usually in the medical profession. In the alternative health world, they sometimes refer to it as like liver stones, but sludge is the more medical term. But basically it's where this toxin transport fluid becomes thicker and thicker, and then it starts to get stuck. And it just doesn't move, or it moves very slowly, or it becomes partially obstructed, the pathway. And so only a dribble comes out when you eat, rather than like a full, quart or half a quart or something like that, which is what should be going out. So, and I have a genetic tendency towards that, 97th percentile. That's very likely to happen to me, again, as I discovered in my genetics. And so there are ways that you can avoid that, and there are ways you can reverse that. But if you don't know, it eventually becomes a serious problem. Now, the medically known serious problem is gallstones, right? And then they often remove your gallbladder. But I would say the not well understood serious problem that's way more common is when that poison builds up more and more in the liver, and the liver can't process it because the bile is not flowing properly. Your body has like an emergency backup system, as many fine machines do. And so what it does is it says, okay, we're all out of capacity here to deal with this poison. It kicks it back into the bloodstream for the kidneys to deal with. So the kidneys do their general filtering, detoxification, but they're also kind of a secondary backup system if the liver is temporarily overloaded. And so it goes into the bloodstream. Now, what happens if you put a highly toxic and let's say corrosive substance into your bloodstream in excess of what it should be there? Well, one of the things is obviously it could put a strain on the kidneys. And if you have a genetic weakness with the kidneys, or if you have some other issues with the kidneys, it can lead to, long-term kidney disease, kidney stones, these kind of issues, potentially irritate it enough to also cause, bladder infection, a urinary tract infection, even a kidney infection, for instance. I know someone that happened to. But again, even that's not that common. But what is super common is that these corrosive toxic materials start to get into the bloodstream. And one of the ways you can tell is that people's liver enzymes are raised. That's the same thing. The liver enzymes are because they are building up and they're getting backwashed back into the bloodstream. And that starts to damage the lining of the arteries, like the actual circulatory system. And then what does the body do? The body goes, well, if this corrosive poison starts to damage the arteries, it's going to cause internal bleeding. We can't let that happen because that will quickly kill us. So what it does is it starts building up plaque, cholesterol, and it starts building up clots, like called fibrin, basically. And it's like an adhesive. It's like a band-aid to stop the corrosive material, the toxic material causing internal bleeding, basically. But then, so what that happens is over time, that's fine, but then that starts to build up more and more, and then a person gets high blood pressure. And then they go to a doctor, and the doctor goes, oh, you got high blood pressure. They check you, and they go, oh, you have high cholesterol, especially the bad cholesterol. Let's put you on a medication to lower the cholesterol. That's what they do. Even though the cholesterol is the thing that you need because your body makes testosterone, which you mentioned earlier, out of cholesterol. As well as cholesterol being necessary for every cell in your body on a fundamental level, but
brain, literally everything. Yeah.
And so they just lower they don't think, why is the body building up more and more cholesterol in the arteries? Is it doing it as an adaptive response to some kind of issue? So anyway, I would say cholestasis and what's called toxic bile is a very under focused on issue because it is a root cause of maybe over 50% of what kills people, right? Cardiovascular disease is usually number one or number two killer throughout most countries in the world. I did actually create a formula for this. If people want to we didn't talk about this before, but getcardioshield.com. I created a formula specifically for like helping to deal with that. But anyway, so in a way, I feel like I'm lucky that I had this spasm pain problem because at least it allowed me to identify this cholestasis, because with most people, they don't even realize, and then suddenly they get a heart attack, right? That's the much more normal path to go. As I say, some people have kidney failure and kidney problems. Some people have gallbladder issues. Some people develop digestive issues because if the bile is not flowing, you're also more likely to have digestive infections. You're more likely to have malabsorption because your body's not able to absorb the fat and it's not able to absorb fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D and vitamin E. So there's all kinds of problems that can come from this, but most of them are like not correctly, like the liver's just ignored, Anyway, I mean, it's a massive tangent. Sorry for your original question, but I guess the point is, I only even learned about this and found out about any of this because my genetics said I had a high genetic tendency for it, and then I got into it, and I'm like, oh my god, this is like such a huge issue. And then, yeah, of course, as I started to get my bile flowing again, did I feel better immediately? Honestly, not really, because what happened is the toxins, instead of going back into my blood and straining my kidneys and my arteries and my brain, instead started straining my intestines because suddenly they were going into the intestine. So to answer your original question, I learned about binders, which is like how to stop 95% of the toxins just being reabsorbed is to take things called binders, which like trap the bile and make sure that it goes out of the body, that it isn't just reabsorbed again. And that was a big part of so doing things that resolve the cholestasis was a big part of it, getting the bile flowing, taking binders, which actually catch the bile and the toxins that are bound up in the bile before it's reabsorbed was a big part of it. And the third thing, and probably the easiest to explain and maybe do, was sweating, right? So I got into doing like some serious saunaing on a regular basis. Again, the mainstream position on that is that's not really an effective way of detoxing, but it's really not supported by science at all. Because even if you just Google, what toxins are known to come out in sweat, like it's all kinds of things. It absolutely includes lead and all kinds of heavy metals. It includes BPAs, like you mentioned earlier. Even includes drugs, like if you have gone alcohol bender or a methamphetamine bender or whatever, like, and then you do an intensive sauna session, they'll find traces of those drugs in the sweat. Like, so so I got into doing serious sweating. And again, do I claim I'm fully cured? No, it's like been 3 years now since I first had that 27 reading. And the last time I tested, which is pretty much 3 years later on the dot, the level's 5. So, which is still higher than 97% of people. Like, unfortunately, with lead, it is really just, it takes a long time to detoxify. And maybe I could have sped it up by doing DMSA or EDTA, as you said, but usually it's not recommended for people unless their levels are life-threatening. High, and it is because it often makes you feel worse. And so yeah, and so sweating the toxins out is the best way, as long as you make sure you don't dehydrate, as long as you make sure you replace the electrolytes. It is the best way because it bypasses all that stuff I just spent ages explaining, right? The liver doesn't have to deal with it. You don't have to worry about it going into intestines and being reabsorbed. You don't have to worry about it going into your bloodstream. You don't have to worry about straining kidneys. You can literally go from cells to lymph to skin and out. So I am a big fan and recommender of sweating.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing, the quote unquote Huberman protocol for a little while. I get into the sauna. I even have one here just in my office. I love hopping in the sauna and then hopping in a little cold tank. My pool's open until tomorrow, which here in Canada is rather cold. It's about 8 degrees Celsius right now, so it's nice and chilly. So I like doing that. And the funny thing is, you mentioned the liver, not the liver, the kidneys. I have a suspicion that I may have some dysfunction there, and it's through testing I did with a analytical chemist who's a friend of mine here. He wanted to do my urine analysis when I was doing my lead up training for the Ironman. I was like, yeah, sure, man. Like, well, I'll gladly pee in a cup for you. So I just did daily samples, and he came back and he said, Dave, do you have kidney issues? I said, are you sure? Because I ran this by a few doctors and they said, this looks like kidney dysfunction. And I said, well, I don't know, I feel fine. Like, I feel great, actually. I'm getting ready to do the Ironman. And then there's another veteran that 3 weeks ago, he was doing a presentation about deep health and talking about kind of what we're talking about here, not on the genetic science, but just looking at blood. He said, yeah, I had low testosterone, but based on my tests, I realized that I had kidney dysfunction, and that benefited him immensely. So now my interest is really peaked because I'm starting to take more steps, more than just doing the workouts, more than just eating better, more than just sleeping better, because I still don't feel great. And that's the thing that's worrying me a little bit, is that I don't feel great, yet I do all the things that I talk about. I go to bed early, I watch what I eat, I train, I go outside, but yet how come I don't feel like $1,000,000? And that's why I'm starting to look at blood, and that's why your field of interest is really fascinating to me, because that might be the next level that I need to look at, so that I can. It sounds like it just gave you a roadmap instead of kind of just aimlessly kind of going in all directions, trying to figure out, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. The genetic testing seems to just doesn't give you the exact response, but like you said, if you're like 97 or 99 percentile for this one thing, that would narrow things down a lot quicker than just trying to figure it out with a whack-a-mole type of style.
And I want to be honest, sorry, just to quickly comment on that. In my case, it was still fairly complicated, but remember, I'd seen dozens of practitioners and none of them could figure it out. I've seen a lot of people where it is actually pretty simple. Like, they're just lowering a particular hormone. I'm actually amazed at how often, and I can't claim this for everyone, but it's just a nutrient deficiency. I had a guy recently, again, he did an interview on my YouTube channel, you can see it. He had a genetic tendency for one hormone to be low, DHT, which is the in my opinion, more important than testosterone, especially when it comes to... Yeah. Well, the other way, it's metabolite.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's much more important for reducing anxiety. And he also had a genetic tendency to need more glycine. And glycine is an amino acid, but it also can function as a neurotransmitter, the same as GABA. And GABA is like the primary calming neurotransmitter in the body that opposes
sleep.
Yeah. Which opposes glutamate, which is the number one excitatory neurotransmitter in the body. And so he had this genetic need for more glycine, and he had this genetic tendency for low DHT. And DHT is the primary GABA agonist in the male. So in women, the thing that keeps them calm, if they are healthy, is progesterone. In men, the thing that keeps them calm if they're healthy is DHT. That's my understanding. It's obviously more complicated than that, but you can simplify it down to that, because if you just optimize each of those hormones in each of those people, it makes a massive difference. So anyway, we didn't even do hormone replacement. I just gave him some herbs to increase the DHT, and I gave him glycine. And even before he started the herbs, just the glycine, he said he was like 50% better. And then once, he'd been on it a while and with the herbs, he said it was like 85% better. Here's why that matters.
Wow.
He was 59 years old. He said he had suffered with intense acute chronic anxiety. So both, right? It was really intense and it had gone on for a long time. For 40 years, he had tried everything. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on all kinds of, therapy and workshops and, doing things like out of the box stuff like ayahuasca and body based stuff and rolfing and just everything. Like he'd done so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
He was just glycine deficient, It's like, and that is not something that you would ever, you'd be extremely lucky if you went to any practitioner and that's the first thing they thought of, right? It's not even in the top 20 list. Top 20 list is what you said, right? Breathing practice, meditation, exercise, all of that, making sure you get enough sleep, all that basic stuff, which is good advice. I'm not knocking any of that, but I'm saying sometimes, especially when you've done a lot of the obvious stuff, just like you just said that you have, right? It's often like some niche thing you never would have thought of, because one of my favorite sayings is, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? And so that's the super helpful thing for me with genetics. And this is where I said I was a health teacher. That whole time between my late 20s and when I started to develop this pain at 40, I didn't drink alcohol. I didn't smoke. I only ate healthy food. I never had processed food. I never had sugar. I did meditation. I did breathing practice. I did all of those things that you're supposed to do to be healthy.
Crushing it. Yeah.
And I ended up with this like severe health challenge that no one else can help. And that's because you are only as strong as your weakest link. And so in terms of going back to the original thing, hard to kill, what makes you harder to kill? To me, the answer to that question on a logical level always is find what your weakest points are and fortify them.
That makes sense. Going back to the kidney issue, I'm assuming I have a kidney issue, but maybe I don't.
Yeah.
But
do you know what markers it was that they said?
So the interesting thing that he noticed was my potassium levels were super unstable and they would crash out to the point where they were so low, they're like, this doesn't make any sense. And, the sodium potassium pump is like the crucial component for life, essentially, because that's how the cell functions. Your gradient is based off of sodium potassium. So I took that advice and I said, well, I guess I'll supplement with some potassium. And I got just a potassium salt from, the grocery store, mixed it up with my sodium salt. And then I have that every morning. And I couldn't tell, like the amount of benefit that had was, it was incredible, because I would go train hard for typically my training cycle would be, I get a ton of energy and I'd be like, I'm ready to train again. I go to the CrossFit gym, I do 3 months and then I crush. And I just didn't feel like training. I gained weight and I just couldn't figure it out. But then on my training cycle for the Ironman, that was 6 months. I never crashed once. And I think it's because I started supplementing with potassium. I can't be 100% for sure. But once he started analyzing my urine, he's like, you got no potassium at the end of the day. That doesn't make any sense. I'm like, well, I guess then I will add potassium. He's like, yeah, probably makes sense. So little things like that, I've noticed benefits,
Can I make a prediction? Are you open to trying genetic insights for yourself? All right. So
100%. I'm already talking to a company for blood testing. So the next thing is just genetic insights for sure.
Well, I'll make a prediction then. So I have one of the other things I discovered about myself, I reckon is going to be true for you as well. So about 80% of people have a normal cortisol genetically, and about 10% of people have it low and 10% of people have it high. I'm in that 10% that has it high. I suspect you're also in that 10% that has it high. If it's not,
you're not the first person to say that either.
Right, yeah. But and the reason why I'm saying that, even if I didn't know anything else about you and how hard you train, all the rest of it, just about that potassium thing. So basically, the more overactive your adrenals and sympathetic nervous system is, your body holds onto sodium and excretes potassium. So while taking potassium is a really good idea with the current situation, it is a bit like trying to fill up a bucket with a hole in it. Like it's just draining straight back out again. And so the real solution, I would say, would be to find out why the sympathetic nervous system is so high, and there may be genetic reasons for that. Could be all kinds of things. Like I just gave an example where it was a nutritional deficiency that was the problem. That's possible. Could be some kind of trauma from whatever. That's possible. Could be some kind of poison. If you have high levels of lead, then even if you're meditating every day and you have an easy life, you could still be stressed because your body's poisoned and it's stressed about that. It could be some kind of hormonal imbalance. Like I said, like low DHT could do it in men, for instance. That's possible. And, it could be lifestyle factors, could be some kind of chronic infection. And basically what I just listed, those are all the factors that it could be. Like it's always one or some combination of those things. And finding out which it is the thing that will turn everything around.
My acupuncturist said, hey, he's like, your kidney meridian, do you have kidney issues? And I never mentioned anything. He's like, you might want to check that out. I'm like, I don't know what kidney meridian is, but I'm going to go check it out. Because he was like, yeah, he's like, well, he was saying the same thing too. He's like, on the medical side of things, like, how are your cortisol levels? I'm like, well, they seem all right. Like I've got my blood tested before. They weren't like off the charts. He's like, okay. But he was looking at it from like a Chinese medicine point of view that your kidneys seem to be like overactive. I was like, okay. And you're not the first person to mention the cortisol issue, because with the increasing cortisol, let's say it's genetic. And it's funny, my dad had kidney cancer not too long ago, and he had to have his kidney completely removed. And we've always had kind of like a thickness about us, and so I'm curious if maybe that was passed down genetically, something to do with our adrenals and our kidneys, that just has some genetic component that pushes out more cortisol, and it keeps our sympathetic nervous system jacked up a little bit more than the average. Because I do my breath work, I do my meditation, but like you said, I could be poison. So I need to go through the checklist, and now you just added another thing to the checklist, which is great. I want to finish off with just one last question, because the community here, and like I'm running a weight loss challenge, and the veteran community is actually more overweight and obese than the general population. And I think for a lot of the reasons that we're discussing here, there's cofactors, and some of them could be toxicity and like stress and just a whole host of different things. In terms of genes, are you noticing anything that kind of contributes to more weight gain based off the tests that you've seen, or the inability, let's say, to quote unquote lose weight?
100%. And this is a tricky subject, because of course people 100 years ago in your country, Canada as well, I think US and Canada, they had about the same amount of calorie intake, but obesity was almost unheard of. There's an argument actually to be made that they even exercise less. I mean, exercise as a concept was kind of invented in California in the 1960s. Before that,
moms weren't running with strollers in the 1940s. Like, that's insane.
Yeah,
like, it happened.
So it's not that we're eating more, and it's not that we're exercising less, particularly. So why is there this obesity epidemic? And I think poisoning is a part of it. I do actually think malnutrition is a part of it, that even though we're eating more, in some ways we're getting less of what we need, and that means just want to eat more. There's loads of different factors to it. And the truth is, and I know we don't have much time, but there's a lot of different things. I wonder, actually, could I share my screen and just give you an example? Okay. Let's see. Do you see
Yep.
that?
Genetic insights. Yep.
Awesome. All right. So this is a woman, Jane, who's let us use her data anonymously. So let's say she came to me for weight loss issues, which in fact she did. So that's a good, case study. And so there's all kinds of factors it could be. It could be cortisol, as we talked about. Very high cortisol can lead to weight gain. Not always. It didn't in my case, and it hasn't in yours, but that's kind of common. It could be, estrogen dominance, for instance, especially for women, but for men as well. And that's where you tend to build up fat, especially around like the hips and the waist and the butt and stuff like that. It could be underactive thyroid. We just talked about that. Thyroid controls the speed of your metabolism. If your metabolism's too slow, then no matter what you do, you will not be able to lose weight. And people debate that. They're like, oh, no, it's just about, if you exercise enough and starve yourself enough, you'll lose weight. It's not true. And my proof for that is there is such a thing called hyperthyroidism, which is not as common. But when you are hyperthyroid, meaning your thyroid is too quick, literally, you can eat 5,000 calories a day, 6,000 calories a day, 8,000 calories a day, and you cannot put on weight. So if that's true, if it's true your thyroid can be too active and that it's impossible to gain weight, is it not also then logically true that your thyroid could be too inactive and it's not possible to lose weight? And of course it's possible, and I think it is very underdiagnosed. I think about 100 years ago, about 30% of people were regularly treated for low thyroid function. They would go in, they'd just be given like a thyroid glandula by the doctor, and they just keep upping the dose until it worked, basically. And then they kind of redid everything, and they made it so only a very, very small percentage of people, less than 2%, would get a thyroid diagnosis and a thyroid medication. And so I think that's one of the reasons we have an obesity epidemic, is because we stopped treating low thyroid. But anyway, so that's a possibility. In men, low testosterone is a possibility. Obviously, high amounts of stress are a possibility. I even put oxytocin in this because oxytocin is the thing that makes you feel satiated. It's a hormone that makes you feel loved, but it kind of also makes you feel fulfilled and satiated. People who have a low level of oxytocin, they tend to have addictive tendencies. And the number one thing they tend to be addicted to is eating. And they just love to overeat. And again, so rather than making you wrong for overeating, how about we give you some oxytocin so you don't feel the need to, and then you can actually lose weight, you know? Obviously, depression, you know, some people have a low metabolic rate. We obviously have a report just for being overweight. Hypoglycemia is a big thing. Insulin is a big, prolactin is another thing that can lead to weight gain, especially around the chest area. So that's something that's worth considering. Some people obviously have more tendency to put on belly fat specifically. Leptin is the hormone that makes you feel satiated. So let's say you have a genetic tendency towards low leptin. Well, then you're going to struggle to feel satiated just on that, you know, most basic hormonal level, and you're more likely to overeat, right? Some people just have a tendency to overeat, as you can see this person did. Some people have a tendency to sugar cravings.
If I understand, just to interrupt you there. So if I understand correctly, this is all from just one cheek swab that you're able to get all
yeah,
the
but
data,
this is only one
swabs?
category. So this is just the weight loss category. So if you wanted to look at kidney health, you can see I can go to that, and then we can look at the kidney health category, and that will have
you can, with one swab, you can get all of this data.
all of this data. Yeah.
Holy guacamole, that's insane.
So when I said over 500
really
reports, now I don't want to mislead people, because it, you know, here I'm just looking at the headlines, as it were, right? It's giving like a bottom line.
Yeah.
By the way, for this person, the key thing was they had a tendency to overeat and they had a bad response to carbohydrates. So all you need to do is put them on a lower, because some people are genetically adapted to be more farmer types, where maybe their ancestors for tens of thousands of years have got used to grains and stuff like that. But some people are still more hunter-gatherers. And so if you're a farmer type, you can even have sugar, like white sugar, you're probably going to be okay as long as you don't go crazy. But if you're a hunter-gatherer type, then even the so-called complex carbs are supposed to be okay for you, can still cause you to gain weight and have insulin resistance and all the rest of it. And so knowing that about your genetics is super important. So this person just had to, I don't think I even got them to go keto. I just said, just minimize the carbs. You don't have to go crazy with it. And go high protein, because they could handle protein well. You can see there, better response to protein. High protein. And again, I know that's not like revolutionary advice. Like there's a lot of people out there recommending that. There's a lot of people are recommending it, but there's a lot of people that it's not good advice for. Like, let's say this person was the opposite. Let's say they responded to protein poorly and they responded to carbs great, but they had an issue of saturated fat. Well, then going on like a paleo keto diet would be a terrible idea, right? So again, it's just depends on the person. But for this person, it was good advice. So I got them on, I got her on high protein, low to moderate carbs. And, you know, like the weight just fell off. It was totally fine, because she does have a tendency to overeat. But as you probably know, like if you go high protein, it's very hard to overeat high protein. So long as she stuck to that diet, the weight fell off and she was totally fine. So it's quite easy for her.
Fascinating stuff. Yeah,
but yeah, just wanted to say these are in the headlines. So I could now download this report, this carbohydrate report, and it has 10 pages of explanation. It gives you like a couple of pages where it tells you genes and stuff. And then it has like 20 recommendations with scores for impact, scores for evidence. So, you know, if you don't have a practitioner like me who can explain all this to you, you don't need it. You can just go and it'll explain everything about what it means, and it'll give dietary, recommendations and all the rest of it. And so when I say there's over 500 reports, I'm not just saying there's 500 of these categories, although that is helpful enough, especially if you're a practitioner.
Mhm.
I'm saying there's 500 reports which you can download and have like a full, 20, 30, 40 page guide to that whole issue. And so all of that is included for the extremely low price of, if you want access to everything, the price is $197. And in fact, if people want to use coupon code hard to kill, then they can get 25% off. So it's under $150. And that's for everything, unlimited access. We call that the limitless access. If they only wanted to like lose weight or something like that, then you could just buy the weight loss reports. And that, I think that's $65. So with 25% off, it's under $50. So when you said, wow, you get all that information. Yeah, all that information is like under $50. So long as you already have that genetic info from another company. If you've never done it with another company and you need to, you're welcome to get it with another company if you want. But just for privacy reasons, it probably makes sense to get it with us. So it's all in one place. And that's like $99 to get the genetic info. But then that genetic info is yours. You can take that. You can bring it to another company if you want. That's what I'm saying is it's not like that just stays with us.
I trust you a lot more than I trust Google having my information. So just going to throw that out there.
Thank you.
I don't know if I trust Alphabet having all my genetic information. So this is really cool. Elwin, like, we're enough for time constraints. I think we can chat for another hour, but I would love to have you chat with the private Veterans Getting Fit AF community at a future date, because this is likely going to spur a lot of conversation. There's probably going to be a lot of questions, and this has just been absolutely fascinating. So let's get into what's the easiest way to start the process for somebody that wants to get on board, and then where can folks find you on socials and stuff like that?
Yeah, thank you. Insights.co, so not .com. We decided talking about that before the interview. I decided I'd rather put the money into making the best possible technology rather than just paying for a .com. So, geneticinsights.co. And if you want to hear more of my kind of takes on things, like I have an episode on weight loss, I have an episode on cardiovascular health, I have an episode on detoxification. I have kind of, topic specific episodes on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Elwin Robinson, my name, ELWIN Robinson. I'm also on Spotify and all the rest, but I usually direct people to YouTube because I answer all the questions there. So as you say, if there's people who have questions now about any of these topics, I'll answer them totally, obviously for free on YouTube. And we mentioned getcardioshield.com. If someone recognizes that they are building up, arterial plaque and stuff like that, and they have high blood pressure and they're worried about it, that is something I formulate that actually addresses the root issues rather than making things worse, like we talked about. And I guess that's it. Geneticinsights.co, I guess, would be the main thing though for the genetics. Oh, and remember to use the code hard to kill.
I love it. That's huge. Really appreciate that. So, folks, go check out Elwin's stuff here. Like, this is what we're talking about when it comes to taking care of your health and looking at outside the box solutions that aren't from the VA or Veterans Affairs Canada. This is not going to come from them, right? Nobody's coming to save you. This is your responsibility. So this is kind of the next step in your health journey. And Elwin, I really appreciate you sharing your insights. And down the road, I would really like to carry on the conversation because we just scratched the surface. There's clearly a lot more to get into here. And then once I get results too, I'd love to share them and kind of go over them and see where.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I've done a few of those now. And if you are, transparent and brave enough to share your results in public, then it's really, I think, a great example for other people about what's possible.
Yeah, right on. So, folks, go check out Elwin's website. Go check him out on YouTube. I'll place all the links here in the description. And thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget, train hard, fight easy. See you on the next one.